Hey, welcome back. We're going to look at mass percents and volume percent. So it turns out that we've looked at a mass percent. So a mass percent is the mass of the solute, probably in grams. They don't have to be. You just have to use the same units above and below, divided by the mass of the solution in grams. And to make it a percent, right, you multiply by 100. You can get a volume percent instead, which is just the volume of the solute. So sometimes it's easier to work with volumes than masses. Volumes typically cost hundreds of times less money to measure than masses. So volume of solute over volume of solution. So for some substances, right, particularly with a density of about 1, it turns out that there's really no difference between. But for other substances, it can make a very large difference. So volume percent versus mass percent. For example, if we go ahead and we take 5% alcohol, so maybe we've got 5% aqueous ethanol. And you might say, well, that just means it's 5 per 100. The question is, which percent are you using? Because there is a 5% by weight, and there is a 5% by volume. And the difference between them is a 5% by weight means that you've got 5 grams of alcohol for every 100 grams of solution, whereas 5% by volume means you've got 5 milliliters of alcohol for every 100 milliliters of solution. And because every milliliter of alcohol only weighs about 0.8 of a gram, it turns out that these differences are going to be quite significant for aqueous ethanol solutions. So let's do a concrete conversion here. So let's convert from weight percent to volume percent. So perhaps we've got some beer that is 4% by weight alcohol. And this beer has got a density of, say, 1.004 grams per milliliter. And we want to convert that to a percent by volume. And we need to know a little bit more information here. We actually need to know the density of alcohol. And when I say alcohol, I mean ethanol. It turns out the density of ethanol is something like 0.79 grams per milliliter. So how would we do that conversion? Well, first off, if we're going to do the percent by volume, so the percent by volume is essentially wanting to know what is the volume of alcohol, okay, in whatever your volume units you like are. As long as you use the same on the top and the bottom, it's fine. So let's say milliliters divided by the volume of the whole thing, right? So the volume of the solution in milliliters. So we have to know both of those things here. Because it's a ratio, it turns out that allows us to pick an easy number like 100. And remember, for percents, it's always parts per 100. And when we ratio it out, any original assumption just kind of divides out. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by assuming I've got 100 grams of this beer. So assume 100 grams of this beer. So if it's 4% by weight, that means I've got 4 grams of alcohol per 100 grams of beer. Now, if the beer is just alcohol and water, which would be very bad tasting beer, then if 4 of those 100 grams are alcohol, we know that the remaining 96 grams are water. And you've got to be aware for these kind of calculations. So you're often told in the problem the percent of the solute, and from subtraction away from 100, you can find the remaining amount of solvent. So I got 96 grams of water, 4 grams of alcohol. And remember, that is my solvent, okay? And that is my solute. So I want to know the percent by volume. So I need to know the volume of my alcohol. So I need to convert 4 grams of alcohol into a certain number of milliliters. So I can do that a number of different ways. I know density is mass over volume. So volume is mass over density. And if I've got 4 grams and I've got a density that is 0.79 grams per milliliter, then the grams cancel and I'm left with milliliters, and I get something like 5.06 milliliters. And I've underlined that 0 there because really I should probably round and remove that last digit there, but I'm just going to keep an extra digit there just to guard against round off error. All right, so I need to make myself a little bit of extra room there, so poor planning on my part. Okay, that I think will work. Okay, so if I want the percent by volume, I've got the volume of alcohol now. So all I need to do is find the volume of the solution. Now, I had 100 grams of beer. That was my assumption. And I want that to be converted to a volume. So just like before, right, volume is mass over density. So volume is mass over density. But the beer itself is not pure alcohol. So the density of the beer was given at the top of the page there, which unfortunately I've just scrolled past, and that was 1.004 grams per milliliter. So you can see it's very, very close to 1. So my volume is going to be very close to 100. So if I calculated it out, it is something like 99.60 milliliters. So that's my total volume of my solution. So now I want the percent by volume alcohol. So all I need to do is just divide one by the other. So that is my 5 milliliters of alcohol divided by my 99.60 milliliters of solution. And that's a fraction. So again, remember, if I multiply by 100, it's a percent. By a million, it would be part per million. By a billion would be part per billion, etc., etc. And so that gives me 5.1. So I'm actually going to finish by rounding now. Percent by volume, which we can write percent V over V. So that 4% by weight beer is actually 5.1% by volume. So there we go. We can convert from one to the other. Pretty fun, huh?